button. Thank you, and welcome everybody, and welcome Hilary and Kaydence.
Thank you. Well, I'll give a little bit of introduction first. We've got people joining quite quickly now. My name's Hilary Manning. I come from Narrandera, New South Wales. It is my hometown. The idea for this evening came about because I am trying to organise a writing retreat in Narrandera. Narrandera is perfectly situated between sort of some major regional centres. But coronavirus came along, and so we had to postpone indefinitely our writing retreat. And I thought it was an absolute shame because, once again, people in regional areas miss out because of what's happening in the cities. And so I reached out to a friend and close writer contact, Kaydence Snow, and asked would she be willing to host this online Q&A this evening. So thank you very much. To give a little bit of blurb about Kaydence, but I'll let her talk for herself. I first met Kaydence early 2018, I think. We're in the same writers group in Melbourne. It's actually, I think, one of the best, if not the best, writers group that I've been part of. Speaking as a friend, I've watched Kaydence go from an aspiring writer to a firmly entrenched and just phenomenally successful international bestseller, and it's just been so inspiring to watch. As per her blurb, she's the author of the international best-selling young adult series, the Evelyn Maynard trilogy, and is now writing and publishing a new dark high school romance series, The Devil Ben Dynasty. I'm going to start the session this evening with a number of questions to get us warmed up. And then for anybody else who has questions, please put them in the chat. And as we come to the end of the initial questions I will just start feeding through those questions to Kaydence. So the first one is, Kaydence, in your own words, could you please tell us about yourself? What do you write? What do you publish? Your story.
Hi, so first of all, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Hilary. I'm blushing a little bit. And thank you so much to Western Riverina Arts for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about my favourite topic, which is writing and publishing. And yes, I write and publish romance. I write across a few different genres. I do paranormal and fantasy romance, and I write contemporary romance as well. Sticking to sort of one lane has never been my strong suit. So I have sci-fi romances in the works. I have psychological thrillers in the works. I'm kind of all over the place, and I'm the kind of writer who has to follow whatever inspiration is drawing me to write at the time, and then once it's written, I have to figure out how to market it. So I have been writing for as long as I can remember. It's always been kind of a hobby for me, something that was very, very personal and not ever to be shared with anyone else. My path to publishing was kind of in a roundabout way because, as I'm sure that many people in creative industries would probably relate to this, I grew up feeling like this wasn't a real job. Like it was something that was so difficult to get into and so competitive and so out there that it couldn't possibly be something to make a living from. And so I ended up in a roundabout way because I wanted writing in my life. I was writing professionally as a content and copywriter for marketing companies and for websites and businesses and that kind of thing. And I was between contracts, and I had an idea for a book, which ended up being my first published book, which is Variant Lost. And NaNoWriMo was coming up, which is National Novel Writing Month, and I smashed out about 60,000 words in a month.
Wow.
The surprised myself with how much came pouring out of me when I allowed myself to prioritize my writing above everything else. And it kind of one thing led to another. I thought, well, let's see how the editing process goes. Let's see how hard it is to find a cover designer. Let's see how this self-publishing thing works, and on and on and on, and very steep learning curve. And I ended up proving myself wrong, and I now do this full time and make a living from it. So it's totally a real job. So that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Yeah, no, thank you. Like I said, it's been amazing to watch you. So I want to, with some of the starting questions, I want to explore that first one. So I know that you write across what would be considered multiple genres. So the Evelyn Maynard trilogy is a reverse harem, which hopefully you can explain for some people if they don't know what it is. And then the Devilbed Dynasty is a dark high school romance, which is totally different. But then also I've read Just Be You, which is a fantastic, really hot romance set in New Orleans. So how do you find building your author brand when you're writing across multiple genres?
Yeah, look, it's something that has taken me time to kind of explore. It's always good to go in when you start to think about creating a business and a product, because if you're planning to publish books and try to make any money off them, you're essentially starting a business and creating a product. It is good to go into it thinking about brand and thinking about how you want your potential audience to view you, and where you fit in with the other businesses and products in the market. So where do your books fit in with other authors and other books in the market? Having said that, sometimes you don't have an idea of what your brand is or how best to represent that until you've been doing the authoring thing for a while and you get a feel for it. So it's totally fine to rebrand or to change your brand or to refine it. It's not a static thing. And for me, I guess, a lot of authors will write only contemporary or only paranormal, and that's their brand, and it'll be in their tagline, contemporary romance with a twist or whatever it is they choose to, brand themselves at. And if they choose to write in a different subgenre, they will actually build a whole other brand and create a new pen name to write different subgenre of romance. And that works really, really well for some authors. That does not work for me because managing Kaydence Snow, managing one name and one brand is enough work. And the thought of doubling up on that is just inconceivable to me. I don't want to do it. I'd rather spend my time writing. So the more books I published and the more I interacted with readers, the more I kind of started to get a better idea of what my brand is. And at the end of the day, my brand is me. I'm very honest and open. I mean, you have to be professional when you're in the public eye to an extent, but I try to be as honest and authentic to who I am as a person, because writing and publishing is at the core of who I am as a person. I've never felt more like me than I have doing this for a living. So for me, thinking about brand was really thinking about how do I want to represent myself, and what is the one thing that all my books have in common. And so the one thing that all my books have in common is that I try to write character-driven stories. So I put a lot of effort into my character development. I put a lot of effort into the character journey, and creating nuance to the characters. So for me, my brand is, whether I'm writing paranormal, contemporary, sci-fi, whatever it is, you know that you're going to get an emotional story, and you know that you're going to get a lot of feels in there and a lot of growth and emotional interaction between the characters. So that's how I choose to focus on it, and that's how I choose to kind of portray my brand, without getting down into the nitty gritty of, you know, fonts and color choices and mood boards and all that kind of stuff in a kind of really broad sense. Find what it is that defines you and your work as an author, and try to have that in the back of your mind every time you put something out on social media or out into the world that's communicating about yourself as an author.
Yeah, right. So this leads in perfectly to the next question, because I know you mentioned at the beginning, you were talking about like, oh, I'll see how it goes and I'll just kind of do NaNoWriMo and I'll just kind of see what goes on with editing and put it out there. But I've watched you, like, I think, if you don't mind me saying, phenomenal about building kind of excitement about your novels and really building kind of a huge following online. And so kind of building on that branding question, how do you find in terms of exciting reader interest prior to release? Because like I know if you're publishing on Amazon or something, people aren't necessarily going to know that a new book's just been launched unless you yourself build that excitement. So like you're talking about how you've kind of created a brand around yourself and like your key thing is character development. But like I said, I've watched you really build excitement. And can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So again, this was one of those things that it was a steep learning curve. And I'm the kind of person that kind of, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it all the way and probably do all the unnecessary bits and read the footnotes. So when I went into this, I went into it not just, oh, well, I'll just publish it and see what happens. I went into it and I decided that I'm going to learn about craft, I'm going to learn about editing, I'm going to learn about the book publishing industry, I'm going to learn about author networking, I'm going to learn about marketing, advertising, I'm going to learn about reader mindsets. I really threw myself into it and just, I did online webinars, can't tell you how many articles I read. I really did my best to kind of educate myself in terms of how to go into this to give my book the best possible chance. And so, Hilary, when you said about, you know, when you put a book out on Amazon or whatever, it may not necessarily get, you know, seen unless you get the word out about it. That is true regardless of where you publish. So unless you are a big name or you really get massive buzz behind you from a traditional publisher, and I can't speak in too much detail about traditional publishing because that's not my personal experience. I only have, you know, what I've read and what I've heard from traditionally published authors to go on. But regardless of whether you're traditionally published or whether you're doing it yourself, it is still your responsibility to promote and market your work. So for me, it's, I mean, we could probably do a month's worth of weekly webinars to go into all the ways in which you can market a book and how to do that. But for me, the best starting point was to put myself in the reader's shoes. So at the end of the day, we're all readers. Regardless of how many books you've written or published, you're still a reader. So I thought about me personally as a reader, where do I find books to read? Where do I find recommendations? Where do I find other readers discussing the kind of books that I'm planning to publish? How do they consume their media? Where do they get their information? Do they review books? Where do they go to the review books? And so, and the other thing I did is that I followed and watched closely a lot of other authors, not to copy what they did, because you have to be authentic in terms of representing who you are and what it is you're trying to sell, but just to see the way that they do things. Because whatever it is that I was trying to do, 1,000,001 people have done before, right? So obviously they know what they're doing and they know something that's working. So I paid attention to how they interact with their fans. I paid attention to the kind of content that they post. I paid attention to when they post, because on social media that can be really important. So I really put a lot of time and effort into building relationships with readers in reader groups and on social media. But it was definitely a multi-pronged approach. I'm very lucky to have a husband who works in tech and has some understanding of advertising, online digital advertising. And so it was a combination of my networking and him helping me to run some ads and kind of figuring out how that works. A couple of paid promotions, but mostly it was really focusing on word of mouth, because nothing is going to sell a book like a genuine reader going out and raving about it.
Yeah. That's so true. Like the fact that I'm already saying, oh, you guys, you really need to read her hot romance. There's questions coming through the chat. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll ask them. So I've got one more question that I have, and then I'll go to the questions in the chat. And if we run out of questions in the chat, I've got a few more questions to take us through to 8 p.m. So you were talking about sort of the multi-pronged approach to kind of really engaging with readers and building relationships with them to kind of get them interested. But I'm also interested in how do you sustain reader interest after a release? So I guess it really comes back to that word of mouth. But like what's really impressed me just is how, for example, your first trilogy just continues to be so successful. How do you maintain that reader interest?
Yeah, so part of it is, I mean, it's hard, but like it's to an extent, I don't know. You know, my first 3 books that I ever published, that first trilogy, are by far my most successful, and I've put out 4 other books since then. So part of that is definitely like, yeah, word of mouth, readers talking about it, readers recommending it in groups. I find that if you do a good strategic push at release time, at the time of putting your book out, it can help massively down the track in terms of continuing to get new readers, because it's not necessarily about sustaining your existing audience. It's about constantly building that audience. So, you know, once my trilogy was out and all my original readers had read it, there was no point in me trying to sell it to them anymore, because they had already consumed it. It was down to now finding new readers to bring into the series and start reading. So some of the things that I do is, say when book 2 was coming out, I put book 1 on sale for 99 cents to get new readers who would then move on to book 2. I did the same thing when book 3 came out. I put book 1 on sale and, you know, had new readers come on and then read through book 2 and book 3. There is a certain percentage of readers who drop off after book 1, and it's just not for them. That's a completely normal trend when you look at series that are consecutive books that follow the same characters. But my series had really good follow through from readers, and so getting them into that first book, especially when we're talking about series, is the key. There are some fantastic, if you are going to run a promotion or a sale, there are some fantastic promotional newsletters, kind of like BookBub. If you can get a BookBub, they're amazing, but they do tend to pick wide published authors, meaning authors that publish across all platforms. I am currently exclusive to Amazon, so my books are enrolled in the Kindle Unlimited program, meaning that I'm contractually obligated to only sell on Amazon. So I can't sell on other platforms at the moment. So that does create some barriers to promoting wider, but it also creates massive opportunities in terms of, you know, the Kindle Unlimited program. It's like, for those who don't know, it's like a subscription model where you pay whatever it is, $10, $15, $20 a month, and you can read an unlimited amount of books. And I get paid per page read. So that is fantastic for finding new readers, because they're, especially as a new author, for me personally, I found it invaluable in terms of reaching a new audience. So in terms of mindset, readers are much more likely to take a chance on a completely new, unknown author with no reviews, who they've never heard of, if they feel like they're not going to lose anything by doing it. So, you know, potentially wasting $3, $4, $5 on an ebook that you don't know whether you're going to like, because you have no idea who this author is or if they're any good, they're more likely to try you out on KU when there's that illusion of it being free. But yeah, when I run a promotion, there are some subscription type websites, such as Robin Reed's. There was one with the librarian word in it. I have the worst memory, but I can send some of the websites onto Hilary, and if anyone wants those, we can pass them along. But they're really fantastic. Running promotions, running giveaways, you know, running perhaps a paperback giveaway and getting readers to tag their book friends in order for them to enter, because then that reaches new readers. So it's really just thinking about, how do I reach new readers? And then again, advertising comes into it, and then we get into, you know, algorithms and building audiences and all that complicated tech stuff that I try to avoid.
Because I get BookBub, and I can attest to what you were just saying. There has been many new authors that I've discovered through purchasing the first in the series, either for $0 or 99 cents, and absolutely loved it, and then gone and bought the whole series subsequently. So that's one other thing that I will say as well, is cross promotion. So cross promotion with other authors. I had some amazing advice and help from some wonderful authors when I was first starting out, which I'm so incredibly grateful for, and it's why I enjoy doing things like this, because I want to help other writers and authors in the way that I was helped when I was starting out, because it can be so overwhelming and it's so much information, and it can be so helpful to have someone just go, okay, this is what's worked for me and this is what hasn't, and this is something you might want to look at, and to just put things in perspective. So building relationships with other authors is invaluable, because these are essentially, this is your network. These are your co-workers. I don't like to think of other authors as competition. I prefer to see them as colleagues. So creating relationships where you support each other, that can be massive for kind of continuing to grow your audience, because it's mutually beneficial. I promote their books, they promote mine, and we both reach new audiences. Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm going to go to some of the chat chat questions. So the first one's from Camille, actually. So they say you shouldn't judge a book by a cover, but that is often what we do. And I have to be honest, I do myself. I think I'll judge it by its cover and then I'll judge it by its first paragraph. But how do you go about deciding on a cover and choosing a designer?
Yeah, look, that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover thing. It is true to an extent, because there are some amazing books with, quite frankly, shocking covers. But having said that, when I take off my, creative and my reader hat and put on my business hat, you absolutely 100% need a good quality professional cover. That is the two things. If you're not going to spend money on anything else, the two things that you should invest in is a good high quality cover, because that is going to be your first impression of your book for any reader, and a good editor. A good editor who knows what they're doing, who's going to make your work as polished and as high quality as it can possibly be. So with covers, I start by looking at where does my book fit within the market, in terms of subgenre and subcategory. And I look at, I'll go on Amazon and I'll actually look at the best-selling covers in that genre. I'll bookmark the ones I like. I'll bookmark the ones I don't like and why I don't like them. I'll then make some notes in terms of the vibe and the kind of mood of the story I've written and what I would like the cover to convey. And then I will find a cover designer. I've got one who I've worked with for most of my covers so far. Her name is Mila Book Covers, I think, .com or something like that. She does very good quality work, excellent. So I basically put together a brief and I send it to her, and I see what they come up with. You have to trust the people who know what they're doing, the professionals, to do what they do. So it's finding a balance between what is appropriate for the genre, what is expected by the audience, and giving it enough of a unique kind of twist or vibe for it to be different enough and perhaps represent your brand as well, that it stands out a little bit. It's such a contradictory thing because it needs to fit within that group, that subgenre of covers, but it needs to stand out a little bit. So it's a really difficult and frustrating kind of balance to find. But yeah, basically just look at as many covers as you possibly can, and go from there.
There's a follow-up question. Do you have your favorite book cover handy to be able to show us?
Of mine or of other?
Yeah, of yours.
Of mine, yeah. So there's probably two. So my first favorite is my first book that came out, Variant Lost. I just love the vibe of it. I love the way that she's kind of staring you down because I think it draws the reader's eye. It's a little bit striking. It's a little bit dark and moody, which speaks to what's between the covers, and it is the kind of dark vibe is similar to what the other books in the genre were kind of doing at the time, but it's different enough to stand out. So a lot of them, so this is paranormal reverse harem romance, and at the time that it came out, there were a lot of covers where the female, it was shown kind of, it was a full body shot, and she was either in a dress or staring down the camera or kind of in a cool pose. And I thought, okay, so female on the cover is appropriate. This is what's right for this particular subgenre, but let's make it a little bit different, and let's zoom in a little bit on her face. So it still fits within the subgenre, but it's a little bit different. And I think, yeah, because this was my first book baby and it holds a special place in my heart, I really love this cover. I do also really love the cover for Just Be Her, which is a contemporary romance that's set in New Orleans. Having said that, now that it's been a little bit of time, I actually don't feel that this cover is best for this particular book, and I will be putting a new cover on it. I do absolutely love it. The design is simplistic, it's beautiful, it speaks to the kind of beautiful story, the slightly emotional story that's inside, that, you know, it's quite feminine. There's a strong focus on female friendship, but the cover is it's much more appropriate for a traditionally published audience, and that is not my audience. My audience has a Kindle Unlimited prescription, and they consume a high volume of books in the romance genre, and this did not fit within the subgenres that it fit into, and the sales reflected. This is my worst performing book I've ever published.
And really coming down to the cover, you think?
Who knows? And this
Wow.
this is part of, you know, this is another thing that I've kind of, now that I'm building my backlist and I have more books, this is something that I'm learning, because that's the thing, you're constantly learning as an author. And if a book isn't necessarily successful to begin with, that doesn't mean that you write it off as a failure and leave it and don't bother with it. You spent how many months and how much time and effort and blood and tears writing this? I mean, come on, it is so much effort to write a book. Why would you just give up on it? There is nothing wrong with trying a new cover. There is nothing wrong with trying a new blurb. There is nothing wrong with, you know, putting it on sale or trying to promote it in a different way. Try different things. Who knows? It could be the blurb. It could be the cover. It could be the time that it came out. I don't know. Amazon algorithms were wonky and it just didn't get put in front of the right eyes. It could be any manner of things, but it's always worth it to try new things to revive books that where the sales have either slowed down or where it didn't have strong sales to begin with.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to jump a few questions because I think it's closely on top of what we've been talking about, because it's still kind of talking about marketing. So you've just covered book covers, and can I just echo Jalara's comment? Just Be Her is one of my favorite Kaydence books. It's so unexpected. I think I even told you in person, I loved how you captured that feeling of New Orleans, the hot kind of sultry weather and the jazz, and she's knocking back a whiskey, and it was so vivid.
I loved writing it, and this is the thing, you know, anyone who reads it loves it. I've had so many readers come up to me and say, it's my favorite one of yours. I love it. A lot of my author friends and other people who are writers really love it. So I feel like, you know, it's a decent story. So there's got to be something off with the marketing. So I'm going to tweak it and see if I can get it in front of the people who need to see it. Yeah.
So the next question from Sarah Sari, I hope I pronounced it correct. Marketing to an American audience. For example, so this again comes back to that marketing thing. Have you I think you do. You have your book edited and written in American English. Do you think that that's worthwhile? Why do you do that?
Absolutely. Look, it's one of those things that I really debated about a lot when I first started out, and I was looking for editors, and it's a decision that I felt like I had to make early on because I wanted to be consistent. And I did really want to stick with British English because that's what I learned. That's what I write. But once I kind of took off my, sentimental, creative, maybe a little bit stubborn hat and thought about it from the point of view, and this is it, you constantly have to switch between that creative and that business side. And when I thought about in terms of actually selling it and looked at the market, Americans love paranormal romance. They devour it. And just, basic statistics, it's a massive country. There's so many of them. They read voraciously. And the fact that I had decided to go with the Kindle Unlimited program, it is very, very popular in America. It has a massive American audience. And for me, I realized that it would be silly for me to disregard that. Because the fact of the matter is that and I'm sure most of you can relate to this, when I pick up a book that's edited or written by an American and edited to American spelling and standards, my brain just switches and it's just like, oh, yep, this has Z's where there should be S's and there's no U's. So, okay, it's like my brain just switches over and it's like, okay, yep, let's just keep reading. Americans seem to struggle with that a bit more. So if it's edited to British English and they pick it up, they go, oh, what's with all the typos? And there's actually been, I don't even know how many instances of, authors getting negative reviews from American readers saying this is poorly edited. And it's like, no, it's just not edited for American English. And so because I knew that I was going to be selling to an American audience, as well as an Australian and a Canadian and a British audience, and because that audience is so massive, I made the decision to get an American editor and edit according to American standards.
But I know there's a huge debate about sort of British versus American English, because I know that those who write Australian rural romance are quite deliberately choosing the opposite.
Oh, look, don't get me wrong. It depends on what every decision you make within the publishing industry, whether it's a big decision that's going to affect the rest of your career about what is your brand or what American or British English you want to edit in, or whether it's a tiny decision about whether or not to do a post on Facebook, you always need to ask yourself, like, what is your goal? Why am I doing this? What is the point? And so if for rural romance authors who are aiming to reach specifically an Australian readership, of course it makes sense to edit for British English. And I know that Australian rural is getting a bit of a following in other countries that like to read country romance, and there's a whole host of things that come into it. But of course you have to think about your audience, you have to think about who you're going to be selling to. And I'm by no means I'm saying that editing for American English is right for everyone. You have to take a whole bunch of different things into consideration and figure out what is best for you and what you plan to do and what your goals are as an author.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on the writing element for a bit longer as well. So I didn't actually realize that you were a content and copywriter in a previous life, which to me, just like when you said that, the penny dropped. I'm like, oh, that's why you're so good, like amongst other things, of just the concise writing that you have. But there's a question from Sarah which kind of really speaks to the conciseness. I think we really struggle with it, and I know that even our own writing group has been having numerous chats about another of our friends' blurbs. What are your tips to write a blurb? I know this is also covered by the Romance Writers Convention. They had a whole 2-hour session on just how to write a blurb. So if you have any insights and secret kind of ideas.
I hate writing blurbs. I hate it. I hate it so much. I actually don't know a single author who loves it, because what happens is you write 80,000 words of story, and then you have to compress the main things of that story to like 150 words. But also make sure it's marketable, and make sure you consider audience, and remember that the average attention span is continuously dwindling, and if you don't have them in the first sentence, then they're probably not going to read the rest of the blurb. So it's so much pressure. So my process is to just spit something out on a page that's mostly just gibberish, tweak it a little bit until it kind of resembles a blurb, cry, send it off to some people for feedback, cry some more, rewrite it about 50 billion times, get more feedback. But with blurbs, you want to keep it to, I mean, traditionally it's been recommended to between 150 to 200 words. I personally would recommend no longer than 150 words because attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. And also I would think about how it looks on the back of a book, and think about how it looks on the sales page on Amazon or wherever it is that you're selling it. So if you've got block of text, a reader is going to see that and go, oh, I can't be bothered, I'm not going to read that. So spacing is important. You want to have a bit of a blurb that kind of talks a little bit about and I don't want to kind of go into specific rules, because it's going to be different with paranormal and contemporary and the subgenre you're in, but you definitely want to space it out. You want to have a few punchy lines in the middle that separate it and that might draw the reader's eye, that even if they go, oh, even these 4 or 5 lines look like too much effort, what's this middle line say? Oh, she's got secrets she's been keeping her whole life. Okay, let me read the top of this bit. You know, like something to draw them in, even if they just go to a line in the middle. But definitely think very, very hard about that first sentence, because when you look at descriptions on websites, and then especially when you look at descriptions on devices, often the full description is not there. It'll be the first sentence or 2 or however many characters, and then there'll be the little see more. So your first sentence needs to be enough for them to want to click see more. And in terms of where to start with blurbs, again, there are 1,000,001 people who have done this before me and done a better job. So go look at what they've done. Think about the book you have. Think about what other books are within, where does it fit? So which subgenre would readers of Ilona Andrews or Callie Hart, or whose readers are you after? Like, if they read this particular author and these types of stories, these are the readers I want to sell to, because that's the type of story that I wrote. Go and look at those authors' books, read their blurbs, read what you think, what works and what doesn't. See if you can find any patterns. But just go and read a crap ton of blurbs to see what other people are doing, and keep editing it as many times as you need to get it as short as it needs to be.
Yeah. There's a follow-up question from Sarah, but I'm just thinking about the Testaments by Margaret Atwood. She has that knowledge is power, like that key concept. That's her first sentence. And I think the Hunger Games blurb for young adult dystopians, apparently one of the best examples. Sarah's asked, is outsourcing the blurb a good option? Apparently she's seen lots of people offering this service. But I wonder what you've just said, like the fact that know your readership, know who you're selling to. If you were to outsource it, you're going to lose that creative control, because then you're actually losing kind of that development of branding and pitching that you're doing. But on the other hand, most traditionally published authors will have their blurb written for them. And the example at the Romance Writers Convention, Liz Pelletier from Entangled Publishing, she talks about writing blurbs and kind of the experience of working with authors. So what's your thoughts on that? Like in terms of outsourcing a blurb?
Yeah, so look, I mean, first of all, I've never outsourced it. So I am familiar with, you know, this service, and that it's quite common and some authors do use it. I've never used it myself. So I've never worked with someone who does this. So I don't have any personal experience with it. I've just cried my way through doing my own the whole time.
Or whiskey, bottles of whiskey.
Yeah, whiskey. It's a lot of whiskey. But so Hilary, what you said about traditionally published authors and they have someone else write the blurb for them. Again, I don't know this process because I'm not traditionally published, but I would imagine that at a publishing house, whoever is writing the blurb is probably familiar with the text. They're familiar with the book that they're writing for. They've probably read it. They also will have a marketing department who will probably cast their eyes over it. So there's going to be a few people who kind of put their input to make sure that it's right for the market, that it's right for the book. When you're sending it to someone who does this service, it's just one person. And as far as I know, there's no like certification for blurb writing. I can't imagine that they would write, that they would read your whole book in order to make sure that the blurb is representative of it. So I'm sure that there are ones that are really good and ones that are not so good. Unfortunately, I can't point you in the direction of which those would be because I don't know. But you certainly do lose the creative control to an extent. But if you're really, really lost and you just don't know, you've looked at blurbs, you've researched, you've read 1,000,001 articles on how to write them, and you just, it's not working for you. If you've had beta readers or you know, you've had some feedback from friends, or you maybe you even do decide to go to a service like this, you could get them to write it for you, and then you can go in and tweak it. There's no rule that says that you have to stick with whatever they produce for you, because at the end of the day, that's kind of two sides of the same coin. No one knows your work like you do, which makes it really hard to boil it down to 150 words. But no one knows your work like you do, which means that you are the best person to know how to represent it and how to sell it. It is painful. It is painful, and it takes time. All I've got for you is that what works for me is just powering through it and getting lots and lots of feedback.
And I guess like the example of Just Be Her, like, and being open to reworking it if it didn't work the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. If it, you know, it's always worth trying.
Yeah. So I think we're moving away a bit from marketing, although I want to actually move on to the beta readers. So Anya has asked a question, but I want to kind of segue a little bit more naturally into the question rather than one of the questions I had was, and this kind of builds on from the blurbs and segues back into kind of the character development you were talking about earlier. Something that I've always really admired about you is just how you really work hard to make the novels the best they can be. It's not just like you said that you started with NaNoWriMo and pumped the 60,000 words out, but you did not, oh, I've got 60,000 words, it's ready for publishing. You went through a really thorough process. And I'd love to know more about how do you make sure the novels are the best that they can be? Like,
yeah, those first
examples to talk to, like you were talking about the beta reading or the covers, the branding, the refining craft, editing.
Yeah. Those first 60,000 words were nowhere near ready for anyone else to put eyes on them. It's learning to make your work as good as it can possibly be is an incredibly humbling process, because you have to be willing to accept that you're not that good until you are, right? So your first draft is going to suck, and that's okay. Stephen King's first drafts suck. You know, like everyone's first drafts suck. The magic is in the editing. So the way I approach it is the first draft for me is just me telling myself the story. I don't think about how readers are going to react. I don't think about how I'm going to market it or how I'm going to sell it or which subgenre it's going to fit into or what the cover is going to look like. The first draft is just me getting lost in the story and telling the story that I want to read. Because if I want to read it, chances are someone else will. Once that's done, I cry.
There's lots of tears involved here.
There is. It's painful. But I love the pain. So once I'm finished with the first draft, I edit it myself. I read through the whole thing. I remove typos, and my first drafts are very, very messy. I don't edit as I write ever. I focus on keeping the flow going and just getting the story out. Half the time I haven't even named most of the characters. Like the main characters will be named, but everywhere else it'll be like, name turned to the window and shouted for name to come back. Like I just don't bother with any of it. So my first round of edits is really, really painful because, and I also often write out of order. So I'll write a scene and then whatever scene comes to me next and is the strongest, I'll write that. And then at some point I kind of have to figure out how it all fits together and figure out a plot and then fill in all the gaps and make sure it all makes cohesive sense. So the first round of editing is the hardest because I have to put it all in order. I have to name all the characters. I have to name all the places. I have to take out all the typos. I have to read run-on sentences that don't make sense and wonder what the hell I was actually trying to say there. So that takes the longest amount of time. I then do another edit, which is refining, taking out things like filter words, taking out anything that's repetitive, really trying to get that word count down. I try to remove, from first draft to final draft, I try to remove anywhere from 15 to 20% of word count. That's not everyone works like that. That just works for me. I think because of the way I write, where I don't censor, I just go. I do tend to sometimes repeat a little bit until I get the right sentiment out. And so I remove a lot because it doesn't need to be said 3 times in a row in slightly different ways. Once I've done kind of 2 rounds, I then send it to a small group of beta readers who give me feedback on consistency, any kind of errors in timeline, any kind of errors in continuity. They comment on character, they comment on anything that they feel isn't explained well enough. They tell me what parts they really, really like, because I know that those parts will probably be really useful as teasers when it comes to marketing. They tell me the parts that they don't like or where they feel like the flow isn't there. I've got amazing beta readers. Some of them are also American, so I get them to point out things that are not Americanese. So like if I've put singlet, they'll go, no, that's a tank top. And you know, specific words and phrases like that. Once I have all their feedback in, I also have a writers group, which are kind of like alpha readers. And I think a few of them are here tonight, but they are also writers. And so we critique each other's work in a much, much deeper and much kind of harsher way than the feedback I get from my beta readers, because my beta readers are also giving me an idea of how the book will be received by readers, what they're going to like, what they're not going to like. But with my writers group, it's much more focused on the craft and, you know, the sentence structure and the paragraph structure and the technical stuff. I don't send them all my work anymore, simply because of I now have the pleasure to be able to do this full time, meaning that my output is quite a lot bigger than it was when we first started working together. And I can't expect them to, you know, give me that kind of feedback, considering the pace at which I write and publish. But I certainly still really value them, that no one will improve your craft like other writers. So really be open to feedback from other writers. So once I've had feedback, I then go through all the feedback. And this is another key thing, which takes time to learn, is you have to learn which feedback to keep and which feedback is not right for your work. And the first time you go through this process, it's really, really hard, because every single constructive or not constructive bit of criticism feels like a cut. It feels like death by 1,000 cuts to your soul. And you kind of eventually have to learn to not take it personally and to just embrace it as something that's only going to make you stronger. You cannot be defensive to feedback. Even feedback that feels harsh, even feedback that doesn't feel constructive, even feedback that you ultimately decide not to use, because that is a skill in itself. Learning what suggestions are actually going to be useful and implementing them, and reading certain suggestions and deciding that I can kind of see where they're coming from, but this actually isn't right and I'm not going to use it. Because you, again, as the author, know your text and your characters better than anyone else. And it's okay to not take on all feedback, but you have to be open to all feedback and then filter it. It takes time and it's painful to learn, but it's incredibly valuable. So once I've done another edit based on their feedback, it goes to my wonderful editor, and she does 2 passes. So she does line and copy editing for me. So she does 2 passes and then she sends it back to me for revisions. And 99.9% of the time I go approve, 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 because she's amazing and really knows my voice and knows my style and is very good at what she does. And we've gotten to a point where I really trust her judgment and she knows how I work. And so it's really quick for me to go, yep, great, done. If she's picked up anything that I need to add in or clarify, then I'll add a few passages here or there. It goes back to her for a copy edit, and then it's done. It gets formatted and sent to advanced readers. Sometimes they will pick up a few typos here and there. If there's time, I fix those typos before I do the final upload, because Amazon does lock you out about 4 days before release, and you can't upload new versions of the manuscript. And that's the process. So I think by the time it's the final manuscript, it's on version about 6.
Wow.
I don't even remember the original question, but that's the tangent I went on.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. That was fully the original question. Like every, and I knew, like I said, I've always admired how like much work you put in, but I didn't even realize it was to that extent. That's incredible. And I've written down a few notes for myself, like, oh, yep. Which actually leads me to another question. Like you mentioned Amazon locking you out 4 days beforehand. I wanted these questions to be really practical, like so for us who are wanting to self-publish or who are already self-published. How do you deal with the IT issues for Amazon? And I'll give an example. I know another writer friend who ended up spending several hundreds of dollars on the phone to Amazon in the US. And I kind of thought that surely there are other ways to do it. So, but this is kind of like the key platform for selling the novel. So how do you deal with those issues?
So my approach to dealing with Amazon is to cry. That's the I think most authors who are exclusive to Amazon, so in the Kindle Unlimited program, have a love-hate relationship with Amazon, because I mean, I'm incredibly grateful to this monolith platform that has provided me an opportunity to reach so many new readers, especially as a brand new author trying to build an audience. It's been invaluable for finding those readers who are willing to take a chance on me and check me out. And you know, I'm exclusive to Amazon, so 100% of my royalties, 100% of my income comes from Amazon. But, and I don't think this is particularly controversial when I say this, Amazon really doesn't care about its authors. So when frustrating things happen with Amazon, I try to remind myself that Amazon may have started in the very early days as a book selling website, but it has now evolved far, far past that. The core of Amazon's profits, its income, comes from basically servers. It's a computer thing that most of us don't know or don't think about or don't bother with. All the other stuff, like obviously it's valuable to them, it's income, it's revenue, but it doesn't even touch the money they make on the tech side. And so on the author side of things, it's a drop in the bucket for them. It is doubly frustrating as an Australian author because, like you said, Hilary, until recently, there hasn't actually been a support number for us to call. So the only way for me to get in contact with Amazon is to go on Author Central. So once you've got a book up for sale on Amazon, you can then create an author account. And so it's called Author Central, and you can go on there to manage your books, to an extent look at your rankings, but it's very limited and it's very clunky and it's very outdated. And then there is a contact us section through Author Central where it's a series of kind of little drop downs, you know, what is your query about, my book, my categories, you know, whatever. And then you write whatever your issue is. And so that has been my only mode of contact, getting in touch with Amazon when I have an issue as an author. There is 100% a customer support for Amazon for people who live in Australia, but there has not been a support number for authors. I believe there is now. I haven't checked recently, but I believe there is now. In terms of getting what I want them to do from contacting them, the key is to be very clear and keep it very short. You don't need pleasantries. You're not building a relationship with whoever is on the other end, because chances are you will never speak to the same person twice. And sometimes I get a response that I just know is incorrect, because I know I've had previous experience, or my author friends have had previous experience, and so I have to do a bit of back and forth, or I simply resend the query and knowing that it will go to someone new. But most of the time they've been pretty good with dealing with whatever issue I have. It's one of those things that you just have to take a deep breath and accept that you have limited control over. And if it's affecting your sales or something to do with the reader side and how you're presented, all you can do is put out a post, an email, and just be clear with your readers and say, hey, this is what's happening. There seems to be an issue. I'm really, really sorry. I'm working to resolve it. That's all you can do.
Because I wonder then, like, you having chosen to only be, or at least having chosen to be on Kindle Unlimited and then accept the contractual obligations to stay on Amazon, that it's both a blessing and a curse, because then the blessing is that you only have to deal with Amazon issues,
yeah.
But the curse, because then you're not able to kind of expand beyond, like, I know another colleague of ours who's on some other platforms. So, but I guess it's a choice that you've made.
Yeah, exactly. I weighed it up. Again, this was a massive decision. It's a huge decision whether or not to go Kindle Unlimited or whether to go wide. And it's definitely possible to build an audience and to make a living writing full time going wide. It's just that it is a slower growth. It's a slower build from what I've seen. And when I was starting out, I spoke to a couple of other authors who were specifically writing in the subgenre that I was going to publish in, and they told me that for them it was a no-brainer. The majority of the readers in that subgenre were on Kindle Unlimited, and in terms of building that audience, it just made sense, and it worked. My book did way better than I ever expected it to, and it was the right move for me. Speaking long term, again, taking off my author hat and putting on my business hat, always diversify. So I long term am planning to take my books wide. I don't feel that I have a big enough platform and a big enough following yet to be able to do it gradually without losing a massive chunk of my income. But my long-term strategy is to eventually go wide, because like you said, I'm completely reliant on Amazon. If Amazon, I mean, it's never going to happen. They practically run America. But if Amazon ever goes under, there goes my entire income, and I have no safety net, no even beginnings of an audience that's wide, that buys on other platforms. And so that's something that's constantly in the back of my mind, and something that I'm planning to shift into eventually. But I do not at all regret choosing to go exclusive to Amazon in the beginning, because it's made it possible for me to quit my day job and do this full time much, much sooner than I ever thought I would.
Yeah. So there's 2 questions left. I've gone through the ones that I had pre-prepared. We're going to do a bit of a jump now. So one question, I'll just say both of them. And please, if anybody has any more questions, and thank you, Kaydence, for just the stamina. I can see you've got your mug there, like talking 2 hours is quite draining. So huge thank you from me.
That's all right. I'm in lockdown.
Yeah,
Portland, so
lockdown.
it's really not having a lot of human interaction. So it's the first time I've worn makeup in about 2 months. I'm enjoying it. Keep going.
Okay, so the first question is from Anya. Can you give an example of how you prepare and plot your characters' journeys from the writing point of view? So you were talking really early on that like what you've actually realized about yourself and you're really branding yourself about is the character. And I know that this might touch on that kind of plotter versus pantser conversation, but how do you prepare and plot your characters' journeys? Particularly, as you were saying in your first draft, that name turns around and talks to name. How can you, like for me, like my characters' names are integral to their personality, and so I've always got their name right from the beginning. So, how do you prepare and plot your characters' journeys?
So I will say that the placeholder name thing, it's really only for secondary characters. So I have named my main characters, and probably a few others going into it. But the secondary characters, I have a pretty good idea of who they are. I just haven't gotten around to name because I do spend quite a bit of time researching. And one of the things I do with names is I will grab a little piece of paper and I'll write out the alphabet on it. And as I'm naming characters, I cross off the letters. Because if you've got 4 characters all with the letters starting with J, your readers are going to get a bit confused. Because again, short attention span, not necessarily the best memory. They're reading for pleasure. They're not intentionally trying to retain information. So you have to make it easy on them. So I kind of try to do that, always starting with main characters. So they have first pick of letters of the alphabet and then moving through secondary characters. So it's easier for people to remember. So in terms of, so when I start with an idea, it'll whatever has sparked it, it'll just be a really basic, like, I don't know, Die Hard action romance, but Bruce Willis is a female. It'll just be some nonsensical thing. And then I'll kind of ruminate on it, and I'll get kind of more ideas for it, and it'll kind of start to come together into a more kind of formed entity. I then will sit down and I will write, before I write anything, I know my main characters. So I have a notebook for each book or series, and at the very beginning will be the series cast. So I will have a page for each main character, and I do about a page or 2 of dot points, and I write down everything that is relevant about that character. Their name, their appearance, age, personality traits, who are they related to, what are their likes and dislikes, what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve, what's something they might be struggling with, what's their most important treasured relationship, what, if it's a paranormal romance, what species are they, or what abilities might they have? How does this potentially then influence their personality if you're talking about paranormal romance? Because I think for me, it's really important to connect the paranormal world building elements with every aspect of your story, including the character. So basically, yeah, I write down everything that's relevant. I get the personality of that person clear in my head. I figure out what their voice is. And then once I start writing, it's easier, because when I get to a place where I feel like, okay, I'm not sure where this needs to go now, I can sit back and go, okay, well, what would this character do in this situation? Or I might go, okay, well, what's this character doing while this is happening? Like, what are they doing off screen? And could that be something that's a driving force for moving the plot forward? So for me, knowing my characters is really, really important. And it sometimes results in situations where I'm writing and the characters take over and something comes out that's completely unplanned. I had one of my characters decide he's bisexual in the middle of a scene. It was just completely not planned, not something that I had written into it, but he was just like, yeah, let's move on. That's just part of who I am. And it was just like, oh, okay, cool. So I can't, it's cool to kind of have these moments where they really feel real. And I feel like the more you know your characters, the more real they feel to you, the more real and authentic they will feel to your reader. Because at the end of the day, if you really know them really well, it's going to come through in the dialogue. It's going to come through in their mannerisms. It's going to come through in the way they interact with each other. So yeah, I start with an idea. I develop the main characters. I might jot down any side characters that are relevant. Then I will go in and I will write whatever scene is the clearest in my head. So I have an idea for a really cool scene. It doesn't matter if it's at the start. It doesn't matter if it's at the end. It's the scene that I really, really want to write. And I'll just write it. And through writing it, the characters become even more concrete. They become even clearer in my mind because they start to have a voice and they start to actually do what I created them to do. And as the characters become more clear and their desires and their plans and their secrets become more clear, so does the plot. New scenes then start to come up that I think would be fun to write. Often right as I'm drifting off to sleep, then I kind of just let myself write for a little while. So I guess I'm what you would call a plantser. So I don't plot at the start, and even with planning a new book, just like with the characters, I'll just have dot points, a few dot points of whatever I think this book is going to be. So it'll be kind of the main concept for the book, any characters that I want to put in it, snippets of dialogue that might have come to me, anything that's kind of relevant to the book, I'll jot it all down. So it's all in one place. And then I'll go back to that. If there's anything from that I want to explore more, then I'll write a little bit more. And once I've kind of got, sometimes I'll be like 10,000 words in, sometimes I'm like 50,000 words in. And then I'll actually take a step back. And that's when I figure out, okay, what's the plot? How does this come together? Because by the time I've spent time with the characters and written for a while, I have a clear idea of who they are. I have a clear idea of what the story is. What is the story about? It doesn't necessarily have to have a message, but what is it about at its core? Like this is about people who have paranormal abilities and a girl who ends up going to an exclusive school for people with paranormal abilities. And there's lots of action and secrets and, she slowly learns that she's one of these people. It's not a spoiler. And like it's there's a lot of world building and intrigue, but at its core, this book is about figuring out where you belong. It's about knowing that you belong and the comfort that that brings. And so by the time I come to okay, what's the plot and how do I bring meaning to making sure that it has, how do I bring meaning to it by the end of the book? I have a better idea of what I want it to say. And so then I go through and every scene, and sometimes I've written scenes, sometimes I've written entire chapters. So every scene and chapter I've written, I write on a card, and then I lay all the cards out on the floor in order of what the scenes are going to appear. And then I figure out what the blanks are, what needs to be connected, what I need to write to bring it full circle to finish it. And then I write out, so each card is a chapter, and I write out what happens in each chapter until the end. It's very basic notes. It's very like 2 to 3 dot points. This is what happens. But by the time I've finished this, I know the beginning, the middle, of the end. I know the point of the story. I know how I want the reader to feel by the time I've finished it. And then I have focus to really go in and nut it out and finish it before then crying and starting the editing process.
Yeah, right. You've just given me a few ideas, so I hope you don't mind. I've just written down my own blurb. You were really talking about at its core, its concept. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. I know I've seen an author meme of an author's life is essentially watching the characters in their own life, like watching characters do whatever they want and just being the note taker. It sounds like a bit like that with your characters. And I know certainly a few characters, like I'm thinking of Nora Roberts. She's fantastic because each of her characters are distinctive, and they talk distinctively and they act distinctively. And I can attest to, it sounds so petty, but I get confused if characters have the same starting letter, even if it's like AJ and Anastasia. Like I'm just like, no, who's that? What's that? So, and I'd like to think I'm an intelligent person, but
And just to bring it back to the original question, in terms of mapping the character's journey, I know some authors do that in terms of kind of literally mapping the character's arc, and it works wonderfully for them. It's not something that works for me because I don't know what that is until I've gotten to know the character. It's really, my writing is very character driven, and what they decide to do and where they decide to take the story. And every once in a while, I'll just, throw something in to make them miserable, and try to kind of build on that. So yeah, I don't know. It's messy, but it works for me.
I'm coming back to an earlier comment you made. So writers can be some of the best, kind of provide the best feedback that you can ever get. And I'm a member of the Romance Writers of Australia, and I'm a member of Writers Victoria, but I like coming back to something I said right at the beginning. The best writing group that I've been part of is the one that I'm in with you, that Ida set up in 2018. Sarah's making the comment, what's the best way to start a writers group? I feel a bit stalkerish approaching other authors, especially if they are already published. And I know that even you and I, Kaydence, have kind of had a bit of a chat about kind of some writer groups can get a bit exclusive, and that doesn't really help kind of new aspiring writers. So any suggestions about starting a writers group?
Again, I've never started one myself, but I did just like Hillary. I think Hillary joined maybe a couple of months after I did. I joined a writers group that I literally found on Meetup. I was just starting out. I hadn't published my book, but I'd written it, and I was kind of starting to think about that. And I thought, well, I want to kind of talk to other writers about this, and I don't really know any. So I just went online, and I went on meetup.com. I put in Melbourne and I looked for writers. And I specifically found a romance writers meetup that, as Hilary mentioned, that our friend Ida had set up. And I started going along to that, and it was fantastic. And I guess have a look around. Libraries are an incredible resource. Organizations like Western Riverina Arts are incredible organizations and resources to connect with other creative people. Have a look at what's in your community. Have a look at what's available online, because, you know, again, as Hilary mentioned at the very start, her original intention with creating a retreat was to create something for people in rural communities, for writers in rural communities. And so the internet is a wonderful place. You know, there are so many writers groups on Facebook. To be fair, you do have to sift through a lot of crap to find the really good ones. If you're going to go the online route, I suggest you go on Facebook, go in the search bar and search writers group. Search for your local area writers group. Search for whatever it is that you're writing, you know, crime writers group, contemporary romance writers group, cozy mysteries writers group, whatever, kind of try to niche it down, join all the ones that you find, and then lurk. Go on there every once in a while, have a look at what people are posting, have a look at the kind of interaction there is. If they seem like they're your people, start interacting and making friends. Just talk to people. If you're nervous, literally just do a post and say, hey guys, I'm nervous. This is a little bit about me. This is my situation. I'm really looking forward to getting to know some writers. Most writers are really generous and really supportive, and because, like, ultimately we all really, really love what we do, right? This industry is painful. I don't know how many times tonight I've said that I cry. So, but I love it. Like, it's in my soul. Like, writers genuinely love what we do. And so when you find other writers, there's always a sense of joy around connecting with other writers. So just put yourself out there. If you want to organize one yourself, do what Ida did. Go on meetup.com, pick a location, like a bar or a cafe, and say, you know, I'm starting this writers group to connect with other writers in, you know, whether it's in your area or whether it's in a specific genre, and set a time. And you might not get anyone on the first one, or you might get a few people. There are going to be people who might come and go, but eventually you will find what works for you. So basically you just have to try a bunch of different things. So I have a writers group that I attend in person. Well, not at the moment because of COVID, but with Hilary, we meet up in the city. You know, we have a couple of drinks and we talk books and about our own experiences and what's been going on our author journeys. I have the very first writers group that I joined, the one that gives me feedback, which has been the best, most amazing growth experience as a writer. Is I learned how to take feedback by being part of that writers group. And that one I got into through, I did a short course through Australian Writers Centre, I think. Yes, AWC, thank you, Jalara, Australian Writers Centre. And when you do a course with them, you get added to one of their Facebook groups for everyone who's done a course. And someone else had posted in there saying, would anyone like to set up a critique group? And I put my hand up, and that grew out of that. So there are paid courses, there are paid organization paid courses. There's Writers Victoria, which is fantastic. I'm pretty sure there's a New South Wales counterpart, but I don't know it.
And there's an ACT one.
And an ACT one.
And
there's
the one surprisingly in Eastern Riverina as well, Anya. So
yeah. So you just kind of have to start poking around and see what you can find, get involved, reach out to some of these organizations, or find a course you might be interested in, or a talk that might be happening in your area. Get in some writers groups. Think about what kind of writers group you want. Is it one where you kind of it's more social and you talk about books and you give each other advice, or do you want a critique group? Do you want a group where you give each other feedback and really get into the nitty-gritty of your writing? So think about what you want, and then put that out into the universe and see what comes back.
Yeah.
It can take time, because people are very different, and you may not necessarily click with the first writers group that you attend, but if you keep at it and you really want to find one, you will find one eventually.
There you are. So Anya's just posted, we have a writers group in Leeton run by Sarah Tiffin that meet at the Historic Hydro once a week. Thank you. I didn't realize that. So hopefully that we're able to share with that. I'm going to ask two more questions, and I want to end on the really good one. I'm going to ask a practical question at the moment. So Sarah's just asked, she's been writing in Google Docs. Should she invest in a proper writing program? And also, what does she need for formatting to send to the editor, formatting to send to beta readers, etc.? So I just write in Word, and I've always been really happy with that. I know another colleague writes in Scrivener, and Kaydence, I think you could maybe tell us about the My Write Club and the writing sprint program that your husband created. But what do you use to write in, and how do you format to send to editors, beta readers?
So in terms of the practicalities and the programs, there is absolutely no need to spend money on a program like Scrivener, unless it's something you really enjoy, is kind of trying new programs and figuring out all the features and things. But in terms of just getting words down, any word processing program is just fine. Whether you're on a Mac or a PC, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, it's fine. If it works for you and you can save your work, it's totally fine. Just make sure you back it up. Whether it's on Google Docs or Word, have a secondary location where you back your work up. I am constantly paranoid about this and constantly doing it. If you can't think of any other solution and you don't have a USB or whatever, email it to yourself, because it will always be there. As long as you don't delete the email, it's going to be there. Writing programs, it's really a personal thing. I know some people that have written entire novels in their notes app on their phone, because the only time they had was between wrangling children and sorting out dinner and whatever. I know people who write exclusively in Google Docs or exclusively in Scrivener, or whatever works for you. It's okay to try different things. It's okay to not spend money on a fancy writing program. That's not going to make you a writer. Writing is what makes you a writer. It doesn't matter how you do it or what program you use. And what Hilary mentioned about my wonderful husband. So most of my writing, my first draft writing, happens in what is called word sprints. And it's basically the Pomodoro method of efficiency, I guess, or whatever. And the principle behind it is that you have a specific amount of time that's very focused on a particular task, and then you have a specific amount of time where you deliberately take a break from that task, and then you go back. So the program that a lot of writers were using, it's a web application basically, so you just go within the browser. It's called My Write Club, where you basically, it has a timer for 25 minutes, and then it has a timer for 5-minute break, and then for 25 minutes. And the idea is head down, phone on silent, door closed, no distractions. And for those 25 minutes, all you're doing is writing. And so that's what I do. Sometimes I do 15 minutes. Sometimes I do 10 if I'm just trying to, get into a new book or trying to find a rhythm. Sometimes I do longer ones where I know what the rest of the chapter is and what scene after scene is, and I can really get into it. It's okay to try out different times and see what works for you. But in terms of productivity and really letting creativity take over rather than worrying about editing and going back and making sure that's capital and is that the right word, that's second draft Kadence's problem, right? That's when I'm doing word sprints, it's hyper focus, and I don't allow myself to backspace. I just write. Just get it all out of your head. And it essentially teaches you to turn off your inner editor. Now, My Write Club that a lot of people were using, I believe it was built quite a while ago, and it's quite glitchy and tends to crash. And I got really frustrated with that. So I had my developer husband build me a new flashy one that works much better. And so that one is called Write. I can send you guys a link, or Hilary can. I don't know if you want to pop it. But it basically, that's the premise. It's free. You go in, you either use the universal timer or you set yourself however long you want, and you just write. And Write also tracks my word counts for me, so I know how much I wrote day to day and across a month and whatnot. But purely in terms of the timer aspect of it, that's what I do. I then copy it all into a Word document and arrange it and make sure and save it and double save it and whatever. Also programs like My Write Club and Write allow you, so you can create kind of writing rooms, and you can write with other writers. And you don't see each other's work, but you see each other's word count. And it's kind of, it can be really isolating doing this job, because we, as writers, we spend so much time in our heads, right? And then when you're doing it as your job, 9 out of 10 times you're going to be working from home, especially now with COVID, and you're going to be spending most of your day alone in your head. No wonder we're all a little bit kooky. So writing with other people, it kind of helps you feel less isolated as a writer, for me anyway. And you kind of have that sense of, like I said, I see other writers as my colleagues. So you kind of have that sense of working with someone. In terms of formatting, I don't format anything for my beta readers. They're getting my third draft. So I used to use, so there are a couple of different beta feedback applications that are specifically for that, where you upload your chapters and then send your betas a link, and they can go in and make comments and suggestions. So the few that I've tried, I'm not happy with. So I'm not going to be using them anymore. It's something that I'm hoping my husband will build me a version of, the way that I know authors want it to work. But we don't have that functionality at the moment. So Google Docs is really good. Fresh document named whatever the title is, beta feedback, and then you send all your readers a link with so you can control the settings in terms of what people can do in the document, and you give them access to make suggestions and comments, basically, and collect feedback that way. In terms of sending to my editor, I don't, again, it's just a Word document, and she prefers to work in Word, and she tracks all the changes and does comments within a Word document, and it comes back, and the first few times it happens, it's really overwhelming because it just looks like the whole thing is highlighted in red. But when track changes are on, every single little comma, every apostrophe, like everything is marked. So it's depending on what editor you work with, they will tell you how they would like you to send the manuscript to them, how they work. They all work slightly differently, but as long as everything is tracked and you're both communicating and on the same page, it doesn't matter, whatever works for you and your editor. When it comes to formatting, like I then format for advanced readers, because at that stage you're not sending them a document for feedback, you're sending them a document for the book. Essentially, you're sending it to them for review. So this is the stage at which I will format an ebook. I use a program called Vellum. It is like $200 or $300 or something like that. It's yeah, that's right, and it is only on Mac at the moment. But I personally love it, even though I really, really hate formatting. It makes me cry and throw things. It takes time to learn formatting, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm not going to go into details in terms of that, but I do encourage you to look online, and there are many different ways to do it, and there are other programs other than Vellum. Vellum I've found is the most user-friendly one, the easiest one, but there are tweaks you're going to want to make to the document before you import, and again, this is information I would encourage you to research. I personally would not recommend that you format your print books, because that is a whole other set of skills that I do not have. Because when you start talking about formatting for print, you have to think about margins, and you have to think about page count and bleed, and it's so much more complicated than doing an ebook. So I outsource that. I do pay for my paperbacks to be formatted, and you know, you can then do pretty things like, you know, chapter headings that have, you know, little fancy headings and embellishments and stuff like that. So a professional formatter for print is, in my view, worth it, because it saves me unimaginable hours spent yelling and crying over the keyboard. So that's basically my formatting kind of process and approach.
Sorry about that interruption. My dad just decided to wander randomly past.
That's all right. Hi, Dad.
I haven't closed the curtains, and that's really obviously more important than hosting a webinar for 2 hours. Coming to the last question, and I think it's a fantastic question to end on, and it's one that seems to pop up in a lot of writer groups, not just in romance, but in general. Nitty-gritty questions. Do you have any tips for writing sex scenes? So Sarah's made the comment, she's aiming for teasing and sexy, but worried she's falling into awkward and cringy. And certainly also my own sex scenes, I end up writing them and realize that they're not integral to the plot or the character development, and then they get cut. And I was like, oh, but I wrote that. Like, I thought it would. So yeah, so do you have any tips for writing sex scenes? Because speaking about Just Be Her, that is a hot book.
Okay, so in terms of writing sex scenes, this is something that from reader to reader, it's going to be really personal, right? Like, just like sex is really personal. Different people like different things when it comes to sexual appetites. And so it stands to reason that they're going to like reading about sex in different ways. So the first thing is to just accept that you're not going to be able to please everyone. Pun intended. And I guess the thing that I would encourage you to do is think about what you enjoy. When you're reading a really, really good book that has a really good sex scene and it's like getting your motor going, you really like it, I would encourage you to think about why you like it. What is it about the word choices or the style choices or perhaps the interaction between characters? So it comes back to write what you want to read, right? You can't please everyone, so you may as well just please yourself. Because it comes back to the chances are, if it's something you want to read, other people are going to want to read it. The other thing is focus on, and like these are quite general because it's going to depend on the tone and again the genre of the book that you're writing, what stage of the relationship your characters are in. Is it a enemies to lovers and it's hate sex, or is it, you know, a deeply emotional one where they have a really close connection and it's more love making? That's going to affect the kind of language you choose to use. Also think about point of view. Are you writing in third? Are you writing in first person? If you're writing in first person, whose head are we in? Bring it back to the character. You know, like what's the characterization? Who are they? How, you know, what motivates them? How do they think? How do they approach sex? What are the things that they're likely to notice? What are the things that they're likely to enjoy? You know, what are they thinking in the moment? What, like, you know, try to bring the reader into the character's experience. So focus on the senses. That's really, really important, I think. Touch, taste, smell, you know, is there music playing? Are there sounds? Set the scene. And coming back to, you know, the issue of plot, is it relevant to plot? If you're writing character-driven story, you're going to be able to make the sex relevant. If you're writing a character-driven story where it's a relationship, you just really want to write the sex scene because sometimes you just like they're fun to write. You will make it relevant because it again, come back to what is the character's motivation? What stage of the journey are they on? If they can learn something from that experience and they can learn something from or advance the relationship with the person they're having sex with, or perhaps ruin a relationship by making a bad decision and having sex with this current partner, bring that into it, you know? For me, I approach sex in the same way that I approach any other scene that I'm writing. If I'm going to describe in detail a fight scene and explain where all the limbs are and what my character is feeling like when they get punched and what's going through their head and what their body is feeling, you know, like the tight shoulders and the adrenaline pumping and the, you know, everything's hectic. If I'm going to put that much detail into that scene, why would I not put just as much detail into a sex scene? It's just as much part of the story. It's just as much part of the human experience. It's just as relevant to who your character is as a person. So think about the body. Think about not just, you know, what does his skin feel like under your palm, but what does your body like? What does your body feel? Think about what you experience during sex, the shortness of breath, the panting, the feeling hot, like, does your back arch? Is there a particular spot? Like, think about what's going on in your body and in your head. And as those hormones and everything that's happening goes on, describe it. Bring the reader into it. In terms of the cringe factor, it's like anything else. You have to desensitize yourself to it. Just the more you write, the more you will figure out what your style and what approach you are comfortable with. I've read one really good article which was titled something like "How Not to Write Sex Scenes," and it suggests that one particular approach that could help to make it less feel cringy is to intentionally not say the body part. So he pushed his penis into her pussy, like he pushed into her slowly. Like, the meaning is there. Exactly what was pushed where without actually saying the words. So that's kind of one way to make it a little bit less confronting, because sex and genitals can be confronting for some readers. But again, you can't worry about that.
You're not suggesting, just to clarify, you're not suggesting like changing the actual word with the purple prose word. You're just suggesting removing the word entirely.
Yeah, so that's a way of kind of softening the language. It's just removing the word, because when you're in that scene, by the time we've gotten to the penis in vagina, or the fingers in vagina, or the mouth around penis part of the scene, right? I'm assuming there's been some build up, and the reader is there with you and they know what's happening. So if you say, she wrapped her lips around it and I felt like I'm not at my best, but whatever. You know what she's wrapping her lips around. So that is one way to approach that. Having said that, it's not a hard and fast rule. I don't believe in hard and fast rules in writing whatsoever. Give me all the adjectives. It really comes down to what is right for the story and what is right for the character. So if you have a character that's really, really strong and, it is really sexually liberated and enjoys sex and is kind of owns that aspect of her personality, if you go into describing a sex scene from her point of view, then she probably is more likely to use words like cock and pussy, right? So again, it comes down to the characterization. The characterization is everything, especially in romance, because in romance, it's the connection between those two characters, which is at the heart of the story. Regardless of whether you're writing contemporary or paranormal or sci-fi, it comes back to the connection between those characters, and you can't effectively describe that connection if you don't effectively develop the characters. So to get over the cringe, go read some erotica, go read a lot of erotica, push yourself out of your own comfort zone, and just practice. Write some sex scenes, edit some sex scenes, see what you like, see what you don't like, and just keep doing it.
Wow, thank you. That brings us to the full 2 hours. That's been incredible. Anya, I'm going to let you also do just a spiel at the end. But thank you. That's just been, I think, one of the best, like so informative. And I have attended a few kind of writing seminars in my time, but I just loved how you really kind of demonstrated all aspects, like both camps. You never consistently gave only one opinion, like you actually always recognize the multiple opinions, and I think that was actually richer because of it. So thank you. I'll put to Anya to give the closing spiel, and as as you said, Kaydence, if you could send through some of those links, right, for example, so that we can share it with the broader group.
Yep, no problem.
Kaydence, thank you so much. That was absolutely informative. I just got a wealth of information from that, and it was just, I just can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge and your skill and your journey of your self-publishing and writing. And there's probably 1,000 other questions that you'll have lined up, but you've put in such a great 2 hours. That was just really revealing. And Hilary, thank you very, very much for organising this between you both. It's been a fabulous contribution to a free webinar that was just way beyond and highly valuable, and now is recorded, so we all get the benefit of being able to tap back into it. And thank you very much too for allowing us to record it, and being able to share it for free with anyone who's interested. And we really look forward to keeping in contact and getting you back, and when COVID or no COVID, yeah, definitely we want to engage more with you and your knowledge, and Hilary, you as well. So from Western Riverina Arts, thank you. It's been a marvellous evening.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to our audience.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming along and listening to me waffle. Thank you to Western Riverina Arts for having me. And to Hilary for organising it. I've really enjoyed sharing what I do know, and I guess the final kind of thing that I'd like to leave you all with is, you know, as Hilary mentioned, that the caveat on everything that I've said is this is what works for me, and it takes time to figure out what works for you. There are an infinite number of ways to approach writing and publishing and this journey, and different things are going to work for different people. And you know, no one thing works, no one program, no one approach, no one piece of advice is going to work for everyone. So I definitely encourage you all to, if anything I've said doesn't resonate, or if anything I've said you think is a complete load of crap, like, please go out, find more information. There are so many more experienced and more knowledgeable speakers out there than me. There is so much information on the internet. Yeah, just find what works for you. Get out there, find research, get connected with other writers, and best of luck with your own author journeys. I really, honestly, genuinely hope you all become international bestsellers.
Hilary, and Kaydence, what's really coming across is both of you, the passion and the individual journey and the way, and that discussion between you both was just really stimulating and informative. So you both have that individual journey, which is fascinating for all of us outsiders. So thank you very much for the evening, and thank you to all of those who joined us.
Amazing. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.